In 2001, they told me my sister died in a fire. They said the blaze consumed everything: the house, our father, and the little girl with the pink raincoat who used to leave notes under my bedroom door. There was no body, no funeral, just an empty casket and a town that didn't ask questions. But 20 years later, a letter showed up in my mailbox. No name, no return address. Just 7 words written in faded ink. She's not dead. Look in the well. Before we begin, tap subscribe to help uncover the stories they tried to bury and make sure no name stays forgotten. My name's Mara Winslow. I'm 44. I was born and raised in a place called Cross Lake Hollow, a town so small you could walk its edges in under 10 minutes, and so quiet you could hear the chapel bell echo down every street. Back then, it felt like the safest place in the world. Our house sat at the edge of the woods, 2 stories, pale blue shutters, a porch that sagged in the middle, and a fireplace, my father used to say, could outlive all of us. He was a pastor, stubborn but steady, and he believed silence was holy, not because it was empty, but because it listened. My mother passed when I was a teenager. After that, it was just the 3 of us, me, my dad, and Elise. She was 8 when the fire happened, loved humming to herself, folding stars out of scrap paper, and carrying a glass-eyed doll named Charlotte everywhere she went. I left Cross Lake a year after the funeral, packed a duffel, and never looked back. The town didn't ask me to stay, and I didn't ask them why no one ever talked about Elise again. The fire had questions nobody wanted to answer. Reports said it started in the chimney. But I remember the smell, not just wood, but something chemical. I remember the way the living room door was already open when I got home that night, and how Dad's Bible was missing from the stand where it always sat. For years I told myself none of that mattered. What mattered was grief, closure, moving on. Then, in October of last year, I got the letter. Plain envelope, no return address. Inside was a scrap of paper torn from a church hymnal, I think, with a single Bible verse, circled Psalm 77. Tucked behind it was a photo. It showed the corner of a room, my mother's red floral wallpaper, a rocking chair scorched black on one side, but still standing. It was Elise's. That chair had burned. I remember it. I remember the way it smelled when they pulled it from the wreckage. But the photo had been taken recently. I flew back to Cross Lake Hollow the following week. The gas station still had the faded Texaco sign out front. The general store looked like it might fall in on itself, and every face I passed felt like it remembered something but didn't want to say it out loud. The house was worse than I expected. Just stone foundations, charred timber, and a chimney that refused to fall. I stood in front of it for a long time. Boots on damp earth, cold wind through the trees, and I felt it. Not grief, not nostalgia, something else, like I wasn't alone. I walked the old property line. Sage and clover still grew through the cracks. The living room wall had half collapsed, but the hearth was untouched. The same hearth where Dad used to read aloud on winter nights. I crouched down, ran my hand along the brick, and that's when I felt it, a hollow spot beneath my right foot. The ground gave slightly. There was a sound, faint, a creak where there shouldn't have been one. I stepped back. There was something under the floor, something no one ever told me was there. I hadn't come looking for ghosts. I came because someone told me Elise might still be alive. But standing there in what was left of my childhood home, I realized this wasn't just about my sister. Someone had gone to great lengths to make sure she was forgotten, and someone else had just invited me to remember. I stayed at a small inn near the old chapel, room 2. Same floral curtains, same scent of lavender and dust I remembered from when I was a kid. I didn't sleep much that first night. Around 3 in the morning, I sat at the desk with the letter in my hands again. 7 words still shaking something loose inside me. She's not dead. Look in the well. I didn't know who sent it. I didn't know if I believed it, but I knew I couldn't leave without checking. The orchard behind our house had always been my mother's pride. Rows of pear trees, a few old apples all gone wild since the fire. I hadn't walked that stretch of land in almost 20 years. The well was still there, though. Moss-covered stone half swallowed by the earth, the wood lid caved in at the center. The metal crossbeam Dad had nailed across it was gone. Someone had opened it. I didn't bring much with me, just a flashlight and the envelope in my coat pocket. I crouched at the edge and aimed the light down. 10 feet or so, stone walls all the way. I expected water, maybe some trash, but what I saw instead was metal, a ladder bolted into the side, newer than the well itself. I remember thinking this wasn't just a well anymore. This was an entrance. I tested the first rung, cold, solid. Then I climbed down. It was quiet underground, the kind of quiet that sinks into your skin. The air felt dry, not musty like you'd expect, more like a place that hadn't been touched in years but had never been forgotten. My flashlight caught the walls curved tight around me, then a low archway carved into the stone. I ducked through. There was a room, small, 10 by 10 at most, and in the center a wooden chair. On it a folded pink blanket, the kind Elise used to carry to sleepovers. The corner was frayed, the fabric worn thin in spots, but I knew it. I knew it like I knew her voice. Next to the chair sat a lunchbox, metal, painted with faded cartoon animals. I opened it. Crayons. A notebook. Inside were drawings, houses, trees, a chapel, and people with no faces. On the last page, written in a child's hand, he said if I stayed quiet, Mama would come back. I stepped back. The air had changed. Heavier. I don't know how long I stood there before I heard the sound. Something soft, like a scuff or scrape, deeper in the tunnel. I held my breath. Nothing followed. But I didn't wait. I climbed out one rung at a time, not looking down again, until my boots were back on the orchard floor. That night, I went to the chapel. Not for prayer. I just needed to see the building again. The sign still read, Pastor Matthew Winslow, Senior Minister, even though he'd been gone almost 2 decades. The front door was unlocked. Inside it smelled like wax and old wood. The hymnals were lined up neat as ever. One man was there standing near the altar, sleeves rolled, adjusting the candle holders. He turned when he heard me. It took him a second to recognize me. Then he stepped forward. Mara, he said. It really is you. His name was Jacob Renner. We'd known each other in school. He used to help my dad with Sunday services. Now he was the temporary preacher while they looked for someone permanent. You're here because of him, Jacob said. I shook my head. I'm here because of Elise. He didn't speak at first. So I told him what I found, the well, the chair, the drawings, the message on the wall, and the cellar. Elise was here. He kept saying there had never been a cellar. But it was there. I saw it. And someone else had been down there recently. Dust doesn't lie. Footprints don't last in that humidity more than a few days. I asked Jacob if he could help me find any old records. Blueprints, permits, anything that might show what the house had underneath. We drove to the county annex, a squat gray building that smelled like mildew and filing cabinets that hadn't been opened in years. He pulled what he could. The oldest blueprint on file showed a crawl space. No cellar, no tunnel. Someone must have built it without reporting it, or hid it for a reason. That night, I got a second note, slipped under my door at the inn. Folded. No name. Just 3 words. Look in the well. But I already had. Unless there was more. The next morning I walked the orchard again. This time slower. The ground was soft from overnight rain. Leaves clung to my boots. The well waited for me like it knew I'd be back. I brought a rope and gloves, climbed down again. Inside the room I looked closer. This time I saw something near the floor beneath the chair. A brick in the wall looked different, discolored. I pried at the edge. Behind it, a small metal tin. Inside was a photograph. A child, maybe 8 years old, sitting on a blanket. In her arms, the doll Charlotte. My breath caught. Her face was Elise's. No question. On the back of the photo in pencil, she cries too loud. "We'll fix that soon." I drove straight to the chapel. Jacob was there. He read the back of the photo twice. "Who is we?" I asked. He hesitated. Then he said a name I hadn't heard in years. Elias Root, a deacon, quiet, kept to himself, left the church suddenly after the fire, told people he was moving back east. His name wasn't in any of the official reports, but Jacob remembered him always around late at night, always watching. When I got back to the inn, there was another note. "Don't trust the church. Ask Bernice what she saw that night." Bernice ran the inn, always had. I found her in the kitchen wiping down the counter. "What did you see the night of the fire?" I asked. She didn't look up at first. Then she said I saw someone leave the house before it burned, carrying something wrapped in a blanket. Who, I asked. "I don't know. But it wasn't your father." She looked at me, her voice low. Whoever it was. They crossed the orchard and disappeared into the trees. I didn't sleep much that night either. The next morning, Jacob met me at the edge of the orchard. He had a duffel bag with rope gloves, better flashlights. "If we're going back down," he said, "we do it right." We climbed into the well one more time. The underground room looked the same, but now we were looking harder. I lifted the blanket. Near one corner, stitched in faded pink thread, was a letter E. Elise. Jacob found something too behind another section of wall. A tin box. Inside, another photo. This one showed a girl, Elise, sitting alone clutching her doll. Her eyes were wide. On the back, a line written in pencil. "She's remembering again." We sat outside for a long time afterward. The photo between us. Jacob looked out at the trees. If she was kept down there, he said, then someone knew. Someone helped. I nodded, and someone wanted me to find it now. Before we left the chapel that night, Jacob handed me a record book, old cloth-bound. One name stood out. Dozens of entries from Elias Root. Volunteer hours, choir rehearsals, evening vigils. Then 3 days before the fire, the entries stopped. Nothing else. He didn't leave. He disappeared. That evening I visited a woman named Evelyn, the former church secretary. She remembered Elias. He came to the chapel the night of the fire, she said, carrying a satchel. Told me God sees everything, but the town doesn't need to. I asked what he meant. There's a second book, she said. A baptism log your father didn't know about. Jacob and I found it in the chapel's back room, wrapped in a bulletin. 5 pages total. Only one had writing. Elise Winslow. Baptized. June 1996, 2 years after the fire. It wasn't my father who signed it. It was Elias Root. We kept the ledger locked in the church safe just in case. Only Jacob and I knew what was inside. 5 pages total. 4 blank. One with Elise's name baptized 2 years after the fire, signed by Elias Root. Not my father. It wasn't a mistake. The handwriting matched other records Elias had written. Same slant, same way he curled the R. The date. June 15th, 1996. It was there in ink. In a book no one was supposed to find. I brought it to the sheriff's office the next morning. Not the main office downtown, just the satellite outpost near the post office where they handled noise complaints and weekend traffic tickets. The deputy at the desk was young, polite, and completely uninterested. I told him who I was, what I'd found. The hidden room, the dress, the letter. I laid the ledger on the counter between us, opened the page with Elise's name. He glanced at it, then looked back at me like I was asking for directions. Is there someone else I can speak with? I asked. He shrugged. The sheriff's out till Monday. Want me to leave a note?" "No," I said. "I'll come back." I walked out with the ledger tucked under my arm and the door closing behind me with the softest click. Not a word about following up, not even a number for the sheriff. Just silence. That night I sat on the porch of the inn watching cars pass one by one. Cross Lake Hollow didn't change much. The buildings were older, the sidewalks cracked, but the way people avoided eye contact, that stayed the same. After the fire folks in town said all the right things. They packed the chapel pews, left casseroles, sent cards. But when I came back for Elise's memorial, only a few showed up. The rest kept their distance like grief was contagious. Like if they looked too closely, something might look back. Jacob and I went back to the county annex that weekend. He had a key to the back room, the one where they stored records too old or too messy to digitize. We pulled blueprints again, old tax records, land maps. Nothing listed a basement or an underground room, no permits for structural changes, just that same crawl space circled in pencil. So if it's not in the records, I said it wasn't supposed to be there. Jacob didn't answer. He just turned the page. On Monday, I tried again. This time, I brought everything, the ledger, the photos, the letters. I asked to speak directly with the sheriff. He wasn't in, again. The deputy behind the desk was a different one this time, older, heavier, with a badge that didn't shine much anymore. I told him the story. Again. Step by step. This time, I didn't leave anything out. He listened. Or at least he sat still while I talked. Then he asked, "You ever talk to anybody about what you're feeling?" I looked at him for a second. "Are you asking if I've seen a therapist?" He nodded. Sometimes grief can do strange things. I took the ledger off the counter and walked out without another word. By the time I reached the inn, there was another envelope at my door. No handwriting this time. Just a single typed line on a piece of plain paper. She's not the only one. Inside was a photo. Black and white, grainy, a girl, maybe 11, standing outside a chapel I didn't recognize. Her face was blurred, but her posture, the shape of her hands, something about it looked familiar. On the back, Eva Robbins. Missing. 2005. I brought it straight to Jacob. He didn't recognize the name, but he pointed out something I hadn't noticed. The chapel door behind her had the same woodwork as ours, same arch, same beveled frame. It wasn't Cross Lake, though, at least not the main chapel. Could be one of the old mission sites, Jacob said. Some of the retired deacons used to run them. Where I asked, he didn't know. Said the records had been moved or lost or boxed up after the diocese changed leadership. The kind of thing no one keeps track of unless they have to. That evening I sat in the chapel, lights off, just the red candle by the altar burning. The pews were cold, the walls creaked with wind, and I realized I was doing the same thing I did after the fire, waiting, hoping someone else would act, someone with a badge, a title, a reason. But 20 years later, I was still the one sitting in the dark. The next day, I went to the library. The back room held local newspaper archives, long metal drawers labeled by year and month. I pulled everything from 95 through 97, obituaries, sermons, town council notes. Then I found it August 1996, a single line buried in the Cross Lake Chapel bulletin. "We welcome into our care a new soul entrusted to us by grace and silence. May she be raised in the shelter of faith. No name, no photo, no family, just grace and silence." I copied it down, took it back to the inn. Bernice was at the desk. "Did you ever hear of a girl named Eva Robbins?" I asked. She looked at the photo, adjusted her glasses. "She used to sit in the back row," she said. "Didn't talk much. Most people said she was adopted by one of the retired deacons. Lived up near Cedar Bend." Elijah Root Bernice blinked. "Not by then. He went by Edward Ramsey. Farmhouse near the tree line. Barn full of broken pews." "Is he still alive?" "No," she said. "Passed a few years ago. No funeral. Just a sealed box sent to the county morgue. And the girl? Bernice shook her head. No one saw her after that. Jacob and I drove out the next day. The farmhouse looked abandoned, windows, boarded roof sagging at one side. The barn door was off its hinge. Inside rows of broken pews, a cracked baptismal basin flipped upside down, hymnals with no covers. We circled the house. The back cellar doors were rusted but unlocked. The air inside was stale but dry. Shelves lined the wall, books, ledgers, sermon notes, a journal with Elias's handwriting on the spine. Then I saw the bed, child-sized, pink blanket, embroidered stars at the corner. She lived here, I said. Jacob found more drawings, hymns rewritten by hand. On the back of one, my name isn't Elise anymore, but I remember. I remember before I was erased. We took everything, loaded it into the truck, drove back in silence. That night there was another knock at the door. Soft. 3 taps. I opened it slowly. No one was there. Just another envelope. Inside a single line, "She's still in Cross Lake Hollow." The envelope stayed on the nightstand for hours before I touched it again. "She's still in Cross Lake Hollow." I read it once, then again. It didn't say who or where, just that she hadn't left. I didn't sleep that night. I lay on top of the covers, fully dressed, listening to the radiator hum. Every creak in the hallway made me sit up. Around 4 a.m. I pulled the rocker away from the window and sat there watching the street. There weren't any headlights, no sounds, just fog pressing against the glass like it wanted in. The next morning, Jacob met me on the chapel steps. He'd been reading through one of the old journals we found in the farmhouse. He flipped it open to a dog-eared page and handed it to me. "It's from Elias," he said. He wrote about building a room inside the chapel, called it a sanctuary for the soul not ready for the world. I scanned the entry. "A hiding place," I said. "Or something worse," Jacob replied. We searched the chapel inch by inch. Every crawl space, every storage alcove, even behind the baptismal. Nothing stood out. But then Jacob looked up at the choir loft. It hadn't crossed my mind. When we were kids, my father let me sit up there during evening services. The sound of the organ came up through the floorboards. You could feel it in your chest. We climbed the stairs. The air was colder up there. The kind of cold that doesn't move. Old choir robes hung on hooks, stiff with age. Jacob ran his hand along the back wall. Then he stopped, knocked once. The sound was hollow. He pressed one of the panel corners. A click. Then the wall shifted, revealing a narrow passage behind it. Inside was a small attic room. The walls were lined with soundproof foam. In the corner, a cot, a folded blanket, a lamp, a Bible with a note resting on top. I picked it up. My name was on the front. The handwriting small, careful. "If you're reading this, it means I couldn't stay hidden any longer. I remember you. I never forgot. I'm sorry I didn't come sooner. I'm sorry I didn't fight harder. But I'm here, and I want you to find me." Signed, just the letter E. I sat down slowly. The cot creaked under my weight. I turned to Jacob. "She was here," I said. "Recently. Dust patterns don't lie." There was a clear space where someone had sat, maybe slept. The floor around the cot had faint impressions not yet resettled. I opened the shelf beside the cot. Just a few books, a hymnal, a tattered novel, and a red binder with no label. I opened it. Inside were photos, newspaper clippings, printed faces, most of them girls. Under each one a first name and a county. Some had dates. Some had only question marks. One page had a heading scrawled in pencil, "The Others." Jacob looked over my shoulder. She's trying to tell us something. Back at the inn, I spread the binder contents across the bed. When Bernice came in with fresh towels, she stopped cold. "What is all that?" she asked. Proof, I said. That Elise wasn't the only one. She stepped closer. Her hand hovered over one of the photos, a girl with short bangs and hollow eyes. "I know this one," Bernice said. "Came through the clinic maybe 10 years ago, had a fever, wouldn't speak. We called child services. They took her to the shelter, but the nurse said she vanished a week later. Do town records have an address?" I asked. "They might," Bernice said. "I'll make a call." She did. That afternoon she handed us an address scrawled on a receipt. Northern Ridge. A single-story cottage tucked past the old field. We drove out before the sun dipped too low. The road was rough. Most of the mailboxes didn't have names on them anymore, just numbers. The cottage was quiet, shutters closed. A faint wisp of smoke rose from the chimney. Jacob knocked. No answer. He stepped back. We should wait. But the door creaked open. A girl stood there. No, not a girl. A young woman. 19, maybe 20. Pale skin. Dark hair pulled back. She looked like someone who'd been hiding for a long time and had just forgotten how to open the door all the way. Her eyes locked on mine. And then, in barely more than a whisper, she said, "Do you remember the doll, Charlotte?" My knees nearly gave out. I stepped forward. "Elise." She nodded slow, like she wasn't sure if she should believe it either. "They told me you forgot," she said. "I never did," I said. "Not for a second." She let us in. The cottage was one room. Wood stove in the corner. Cot, table. No photos. No personal touches. The kind of place someone would use to disappear. "I found the cellar," I told her. "The drawings. Your blanket." She sat on the edge of the cot, hands trembling. "I thought I was someone else," she said. "He told me I was. That the fire took everything. He said if I stayed quiet, I'd be safe. That God only heard the silent ones." "You were a child," I said. "I wanted to come back," she whispered. "But I didn't know how." "You just did," I said. She looked toward the window. The wind had picked up. The branches outside scraped against the siding. "I remember Charlotte first," she said. "Then the orchard. Then Mama's laugh." There was a pause. Then she said something I hadn't expected. "He told me the fire wasn't meant for your father," she said. "It was meant for me." I didn't speak. "He wasn't well," she said. "Some days he was kind. Other days he'd cry in the dark, pray until he couldn't speak. He thought he was saving me, but I was a secret he couldn't carry forever." We sat like that for a long time. No rush, no big reunion. Just the slow return of a voice I thought I'd never hear again. Later that evening, Jacob came by the inn. I told him everything Elise had said. He didn't write anything down. He just listened. "Her voice is coming back," I said. "And I think there's more." He nodded. "There's always more." The binder was still open on the bed behind me. Dozens of names. Dozens of questions. And somewhere in that stack I was starting to believe was the reason none of this had ever come to light. The envelope was on the floor just past the doorframe. Plain white. Same size and weight as the ones before. No writing on the front. Just folded, closed, no seal. Inside was a piece of paper creased twice. A hand-drawn map done in blue ink. No street names, just landmarks: the chapel, the orchard, the edge of the lake, and one place marked with a red X. It wasn't the well. I held it under the desk lamp and stared for a long time before realizing what the X pointed to. The old chapel supply shed. It sat behind the main building, tucked behind the trees, mostly forgotten. When I was a kid, it was used for storing Christmas decorations and choir stands that didn't fit in the sanctuary. I hadn't been inside in over 20 years. Jacob met me there the next morning. We didn't speak as we crossed the narrow footpath. A squirrel darted across the gravel. Wind rustled dry branches overhead. The shed looked like it always had: crooked roofline, warped wooden door, rusted hinges. The lock was still there but broken, cut clean through probably days ago. Someone had been in. Jacob pushed the door open. The smell hit us first: mildew and old paper. The space was tight. Metal shelves lined the walls. Most held boxes labeled in permanent marker, Lent banners, spare bulbs, Advent candles. In the corner sat a file cabinet, not part of the church's original set. This one looked out of place, darker metal, no labels, older. Jacob tugged the top drawer. It squealed open halfway, then stopped. Something jammed inside. I pulled gently until it gave. Inside was a box wrapped in muslin cloth, dusty but not undisturbed. The corners had been turned up like someone had unfolded and refolded them. I opened the cloth and found a leather-bound book. No title on the spine. No markings. Just a dark brown cover worn at the edges. Inside, the pages were filled with names. Only first names. Dozens of them. All girls. Most with a year written beside them. Some had notes, things like strong alto or resists routine. One was marked needs discipline before placement. And then, near the back one page in a different hand. The fifth girl not to be named. Too quiet. But she listens. Always. Beneath it, the words basement ledger circled twice. I looked at Jacob. Have you ever heard of that? He shook his head. There's only the office ledgers. Baptisms attendance. Nothing stored in a basement. Bernice happened to be restocking votive candles when we got back to the chapel. She paused when I mentioned the phrase. I remember something, she said. Years ago, I helped clear out the sacristy. There was a trap door under one of the old rugs. I assumed it was for old choir robes. Didn't think much of it. We found it under the altar prep table, a small wooden hatch nearly flush with the floor. The hinges had rusted shut. Jacob used a screwdriver to pry it up. The space below was cramped and dry, only about 3 feet of headroom, but in the far corner, wrapped in oilskin, was a long, narrow box. Inside were ledgers, 11 in total, all labeled by year. I pulled the one marked 1996. The entries started the way you'd expect. Weekly sermons, Sunday attendance, choir practices, notes from confession. But near the back, the handwriting changed, and so did the content. Names were coded, phrases repeated every few pages. Silence is sanctuary, obedience is salvation, and between 2 entries a photograph. A girl in a white choir robe standing in the loft. Her face was turned just slightly away, blank expression. Thin shoulders. Her feet were bare. I turned it over. The fifth girl. No name. No voice. Still watching. I looked at Elise, who'd come in quietly while we were searching. She took the photo from my hands. Held it carefully. Her voice was low. That's her. You remember her? I asked. I never knew her name, Elise said. But I remember her voice. At night when we weren't supposed to speak. She didn't talk, but she sang. She paused. She always sang second. Jacob spoke from behind us. So there were 5. Naomi, Claire, Lily. Elise said. And the 5th. We weren't allowed to see each other. But sometimes when the walls were quiet, we could hear. That's how we knew we weren't alone. We sat with the ledgers for the rest of the afternoon. The paper had yellowed, but the ink was sharp. The words didn't sound like my father, or like any sermon I'd heard growing up. They sounded like instructions, like someone was building something a pattern and each girl was a part of it. Before we locked the records away again, Jacob found another clue. Tucked inside the 1995 ledger was a folded church bulletin. On the back, a list. Names again. Elise's was circled, so was Naomi's. 2 others were crossed out, and next to one in red pen transferred. St. Terrace Shelter. No trace. I took the page with me. That evening, back at the inn, Elise drew something at the desk while I read through the shelter reports Bernice had dug up. A few pages in, I saw a line that made me stop. Transfer child placed under clerical directive. Name withheld. Same year. Same month. Same shelter. When I looked over, Elise had finished the sketch. It showed 5 girls standing in the orchard, their hands linked, their faces clear. 4 I recognized. The 5th she left unnamed. But in the corner, Elise had drawn a star stitched into the hem of the girl's robe. We locked the ledgers in the church safe before sunset. Jacob double-checked the latch. I tested it twice. It wasn't paranoia. Not anymore. Someone had broken into the chapel's mailbox the night before. Tore the flap clean off. Nothing was taken. No damage inside. Just open. Like a warning. That same morning someone left a cassette at the front desk of the inn. No label. Just my name scribbled faintly on the sleeve. Bernice said a man in a dark sedan dropped it off. Didn't get out of the car. Didn't leave a note. Jacob had an old tape deck in the church basement. We played the cassette with the volume low, static for the first few seconds. Then children singing. 4 voices, no accompaniment. They were young, maybe 9, 10 years old. Singing in harmony. Something about the melody felt familiar. Not a hymn I remembered from childhood, but something Elise had hummed once years ago when she thought no one was listening. And underneath the singing, barely audible, was a 5th voice. Male. Whispering between lines. The ones who remain silent shall be lifted. The ones who remember must forget. We listened to it twice. Then Jacob stopped the tape. I didn't speak. I think we both needed a few minutes to let the sound leave the room. Later that day, Elise brought something from the binder she hadn't shown us yet, the last page of one of her old journals. A line written in pencil across the bottom. I left them behind. 3 voices trained to sing, but never heard. Then, in a different pen, smaller and neater, Cross Lake holds more than just the 2 of us. We asked her to name them. Naomi. Claire. Lily, she said. They were there. We weren't allowed to see each other, but I remember their voices. We'd sing at night when we thought no one was listening. She paused, then added, there was another. I called her the hushed one. She never sang out loud, only behind the walls. It lined up with the photo from the basement ledger. The girl with her face turned away, the one marked still watching. We checked parish records again. Nothing. School rosters, town registries, no match. Then in a plastic bin in the Sunday school storage room, I found a roll of class photos. Some were loose, others curled with age. One was labeled Spring 1998, Cross Lake Chapel Choir. Bottom row, 4 girls. Elise was second from the left. Beside her were 3 unnamed children. None of the names matched records. None had been labeled. But I recognized their faces. And so did Elise. She pointed without hesitation. That's Claire. That's Lily. That's Naomi. The 4th space was blank. Someone had cut the photo. Clean edge. Straight through the 5th face. Later that night, Elise asked to go back to the well. I wasn't sure at first, but she was steady, calm, and I could tell it mattered to her. We returned just after dusk. The orchard was quiet. No wind, no birds. The trees didn't move. She climbed down first. The rope creaked as she lowered herself through the opening. I followed. The underground room was exactly as we'd left it. The cot, the blanket, her old lunchbox. Elise walked to the far wall and stood there with one hand resting on the stone. It always felt like a hiding place, she said. But now I see it. It was a cage. She leaned in, pressing her ear gently against the rock. I used to think the walls could breathe. We searched the room again. Jacob checked the seams in the brick. I followed the edges with a flashlight. Then Elise stopped. Here. There was a thin crack near the back, hairline barely visible, but it ran vertically from floor to ceiling. Jacob knelt down and pressed along the base. This isn't just old settling. This is a seam. He pried at the mortar with a flat tool. Slowly, a small stone gave way. Behind it, a metal plate, about the size of a shoebox lid, bolted into the wall. We worked the bolts loose one at a time. Inside was a compartment, dry, lined in felt, and in the center a book, leather cover, no markings, inside names, first names only. Some we'd seen before, others were new. Ages ranged from 6 to 12. Each entry had a year. Some had small notes, strong soprano, uncooperative, withdrawn. But at the back, in handwriting different from the rest, was an entry 5th girl. Not to be recorded. Too quiet. Not suitable for placement. Then, beneath that, 2 words, scrawled sideways in pencil basement copy. I traced the writing with my thumb. The pencil had smudged at the edges as if someone's hand had shaken while writing it. We brought the book back to the chapel, placed it beside the other records. None of the official ledgers made any mention of the girls. Not in rosters, not in sermons, not in pastoral notes. The only place they existed was here. After we locked the files away again, we heard footsteps. Not near the chapel inside. Elise stepped out of the office and froze. A woman stood near the back pews. Brown coat, ID badge clipped to the collar. She held a file folder in her left hand and a look that told me she hadn't come to ask questions. She'd come because someone already had. Agent Lauren Shaw, she said. Cold Case Division, we've been tracking patterns like this in 3 counties. Yours just opened the door. She laid the folder on the pew and opened it. Inside were reports, case summaries, transfer forms, names, most redacted, some familiar. Then she tapped a page. Your sister, she said, looking at me. She's not the only one. Agent Shaw didn't take notes, at least not in front of us. She kept her folder open as she walked the chapel's side aisles, scanning the walls, pausing near the pulpit. Her badge stayed clipped to her collar, just visible like a quiet signal that she wasn't just visiting. This place, she said, matches at least 2 others. Same layout, same founding board, same language. She laid out documents on the communion table, copies of records we hadn't seen before, transfer logs, form letters from church elders to nearby shelters, redactions everywhere, but the tone, the wording matched the ledgers we'd recovered. She tapped one in particular. A memo dated 1995. All 5th voices to be rotated out before inspection. The weaker vessels will not endure the Lord's work. Silence remains our signature. I read it twice. They were planning it, I said. Structuring it. She nodded. This wasn't care. It wasn't oversight. It was something else. Systematic. That night, Elise didn't say much. She kept the binder in her lap as she sat on the edge of the bed staring at the photo of the 5th girl, the one who'd been cut from the choir picture. She traced the edge where the paper had been trimmed. She was real, Elise said quietly. I don't remember her face, but I remember the lullabies she'd hum, late at night when the others couldn't sleep. I sat across from her, flipping through one of the chapel's hymnals. Tucked in the back was a slip of paper, a choir schedule from 1998. 4 names each marked with a rehearsal time. A 5th time slot blank. That space again. Always the 5th. Always missing. The next morning, Agent Shaw came back with a federal search warrant. The chapel basement, the orchard, the supply shed, all of it. Jacob stayed outside while the team worked. He leaned against the side of the chapel arms, crossed eyes low. When I brought him coffee, he took it without a word. Do you think it was always like this? I asked. From the beginning. No, he said. But I think someone learned how to make it look like it was. By noon, the team uncovered a second crawl space, not under the altar beneath the old choir loft, hidden by a false panel in the floorboards. Inside, 2 metal lockers chained shut. They broke the locks carefully. Inside were boxes of tapes, audio recordings, labeled by date, a mix of rehearsals, sermons, and something else. Private sessions. The tapes weren't marked with names, just numbers, but the content was unmistakable. Children's voices, soft, hesitant, singing scales, then reciting phrases. I will be obedient. The outside world is not for me. I will stay silent. I will stay small. Jacob stepped outside after the 3rd tape. He didn't come back in. I stayed. One tape in particular stood out. Dated June 14, 1996. A child sings alone, faltering on the 2nd verse. Then silence. Footsteps. A male voice, calm, steady, familiar. My father. You are the quietest one, he says. That's why you're special. He repeats it, over and over. Then tells the child she's not meant to be seen, only heard by him, by the Lord. He finishes with a prayer I don't recognize. And then, nothing. Just the soft click of the tape ending. I stood there in that cold room holding the cassette, and for the first time since all this began, I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel vindicated. I felt hollow. Agent Shaw collected the tapes and sealed the lockers for evidence transport. Before she left, she handed me a sheet of paper, a scan from the archive of another chapel 2 states over. It was the same ledger format, same codes, same structure, different names, different town, but the same phrase at the top of the page, silence is sanctuary. She circled a name at the bottom. Claire Reynolds, transferred 1996. Status deceased. A case file followed. Missing child. Closed within 6 weeks. No investigation. Elise read it in silence, then folded the page carefully and placed it inside her journal. She didn't run, she said. She was erased. Later that week, one of the old deacons, Harold Boone, showed up unannounced. Gray hair, shaky hands. He asked if he could sit. He brought with him a letter. Dated August 2001. It had my father's signature at the bottom. I wasn't part of what happened, Harold said. But I knew. I knew he kept records. That he was selecting them. Why didn't you say anything I asked? Because the ones who did disappeared, or were buried in paperwork until they stopped asking. He slid the letter across the table. In it, my father described anointed placements. He used coded language references to obedience to choirs of silence. But the intent was clear. He was offering girls, specific girls, to other chapels under discipline watch. It wasn't just Cross Lake. It was a network. When Harold left, he said something I'll never forget. I thought if I stayed quiet, it would die with him. But it didn't. It just changed hands. By the time we saw the smoke, the chapel was already gone. Jacob was the first to reach it. He called me from the orchard, voice rough from running. There's nothing left, he said. I didn't ask what he meant. I just drove. The fire started just after midnight. Someone poured accelerant across the back wall near the pulpit where the choir loft sat above. The heat reached the rafters fast. The supply shed caught next. By the time fire crews got there, most of the old structure was just embers. No one was inside, no one injured. But every ledger, every tape, every physical record the federal team hadn't yet collected was gone. Only 2 sets of documents had been duplicated, mine and Shaw's. Elise stood beside me as the last flames were put out. She didn't cry. She didn't speak. She just stared into the ash until her face turned gray from soot. "They erased it once," she said quietly. "Now they're trying to erase the proof." Shaw arrived later that morning. She stood with us at the edge of the orchard watching the chapel's frame collapse inward. "We have enough," she said. "It won't stop here." By noon, federal subpoenas had gone out to 3 churches in 2 neighboring states. St. Terrace Shelter was named directly in one of the affidavits. Records recovered from those sites confirmed what we already knew, that placements weren't rare. They were organized, systematic, and always directed through internal memos signed by names no longer on payroll. 2 former board members were arrested, one in Kansas, the other in Missouri. Neither spoke. But both had received letters from Cross Lake within months of each other, both referencing obedient chorus candidates. The charges included child endangerment, abuse of authority, and obstruction. They didn't cover everything, not by a long shot, but it was a start. I gave Elise copies of the choir photo and the marked ledger pages. She asked to keep the original journal, the one she'd carried since she was 10. She wrote one more line at the bottom. We were not lost. We were buried. A week later, a town meeting was held. Not in the chapel. What was left had been roped off by the fire marshal, but at the old library annex. Chairs were folded out. Coffee was poured. The atmosphere was quiet, unsure. Elise spoke first. She didn't talk about what happened in the well, or the 5th girl, or the man who called himself pastor. She talked about what it meant to stay silent for so long, what it cost, what she remembered most. The walls didn't hold us in, she said. The silence did. Some people looked down, others nodded slowly. A few walked out, but not all. The town posted a public apology the next day. No one signed it, but it stayed taped to the chapel's charred fence for a month before the wind took it down. Agent Shaw stayed on the case for another 6 weeks. The network was deeper than we thought, at least 9 sites total, all run under different names, all tied to a single foundation that hadn't filed taxes since 2003. The last known director had vanished in 2006. No record since, no address, not even a death certificate. Shaw said it wasn't unusual. When systems like this are built to survive exposure, they tend to collapse inward when cornered. Before she left, she handed me a flash drive. "Everything we know is here," she said. "In case something happens. In case the files go missing. Again." I kept it in a locked drawer at the inn. I never opened it. Not because I didn't want answers, but because I already knew them. Somewhere along the way, justice had stopped being about trials or convictions. It had become about remembering. Elise moved away that fall. No fanfare. Just a quiet goodbye in front of the chapel ruins. She left behind a copy of her drawing the 5 girls in the orchard, hands linked. I framed it, hung it above my desk. Jacob stayed in town. We talk sometimes, mostly about repairs or weather, but not always. One evening, as the leaves turned and the wind picked up again across the lake, he told me something I'd never heard from him before. "I used to think your father was just strict," he said. "Old school. A hard man." He paused. "But he built this. He chose it. And I let him." There wasn't anything to say back. So we stood there for a while, letting the orchard sway in the distance. The chapel was never rebuilt. The land was cleared, the foundation torn up. But the trees remain. So does the well, sealed now, capped in steel with a small plaque bolted to the side. In memory of the unnamed, the unheard, the 5th voice that sang in silence. I still have the note. The one left in the chapel mailbox, folded once. No handwriting on the outside, just those 3 words on the inside. You forgot one. No return address, no signature. I don't know who left it. Could have been someone trying to stir doubt, or someone who knew more than they were willing to say aloud. But it worked. For weeks after I found myself replaying everything, every record, every name we recovered, every face Elise remembered, every silence in the tapes, looking for the one we missed. And maybe that's what haunts me most. Not the crimes, not even the cover-up, but the quiet certainty that someone a child might still be out there, unnamed, unspoken, still waiting to be remembered. Elise doesn't talk about the chapel anymore. She moved 2 states over, started school again under her middle name. We exchange cards now and then, birthdays, holidays. Sometimes she sends drawings. Last one was of a tree, split down the middle, one side green full of life, the other side bare, its branches stretched like arms. She didn't write anything on the back, just signed it with a small note, still growing. Jacob stayed in Cross Lake. He and I keep things simple, practical. He rebuilt the orchard fence with help from the fire department and 2 of the younger deacons. No new chapel, no sermons, just a field with wind and the plaque by the sealed well. Sometimes I walk out there alone, and sometimes when the wind moves just right through the trees, it sounds like voices. Not clear words, just melody. Rising, falling, like children humming from somewhere deep below. I used to think memory worked like a book, something you could close when you were done with it. But it's more like the soil. It holds everything, even the things you thought you buried for good. And the truth is, some stories don't end with justice, or peace, or even answers. Some end in ash. But that doesn't mean they weren't worth telling. We told it. All of it. And the ones who were buried in silence, they have names again. Some won't be found. Others never will be. But they were here. They were real. And they are not forgotten. So if you've listened this far, thank you. For staying with me. For letting their voices be heard. If this story stayed with you, maybe share it with someone who's ready to listen. Because stories like these, they only stay buried when no one's willing to dig. And sometimes all it takes is someone who remembers.